Hello everyone, here we go with the Count of Monte Cristo, chapter 13, An Italian Scholar. It's a long one. Hold on. Dantes threw himself into the arms of his new friend for whom he had waited so impatiently and so long, and drew him toward the window that the little light that penetrated into his cell might reveal his features. His new-found friend was short, with hair blanched with suffering rather than with age. His keen, penetrating eyes were almost hidden beneath thick gray eyebrows, and his beard, which was still black, reached down to his chest. His thin face, furrowed with deep lines, and the bold outlines of his characteristic features revealed a man who was more accustomed to exercise his mental faculties than his physical strength. Large drops of perspiration stood on his brow, and as for his garments, it was impossible to distinguish their original form, for they were in rags. He appeared at least 65 years of age, but the agility of his movement seemed to imply that his aged appearance was due to long captivity. He received the young man's enthusiastic outbursts with a certain pleasure. His icy soul seemed to gather warmth for an instant and to melt in the contact with this ardent youth. He thanked him with much feeling for his cordiality, though his disappointment had been very bitter at finding another dungeon where he had hoped to find liberty. "Now let us see whether we can conceal from the eyes of your gaolers all traces of my entrance," said the newcomer, and stooping down to the aperture, he lifted the stone with the greatest ease, in spite of its weight, and fitted it to the hole. "This stone has been removed very carelessly," he said, shaking his head. "Hadn't you any tools?" "Have you any?" Dantes asked with astonishment. "I made some. With the exception of a file, I have all I need. Chisel, pincers, crowbar." "Oh, I should like to see these products of your patience and industry." "Well, to begin with, here is my chisel." And he showed Dantes a sharp, strong blade with a handle of beechwood. "How did you make that?" asked Dantes. "Out of one of the clamps of my bed. I have hollowed out this passage, a distance of about 50 feet with this instrument. To think that all my work had been in vain! There is now no means of escape. God's will be done." Dantes looked with astonishment mingled with admiration at this man who renounced with such philosophy a hope cherished for so long. "Now," said Dantes, "will you tell me who you are?" "Yes, if it interests you." Then he continued sadly, "I am the Abbé Faria, a prisoner in the Château d'If since 1811, and previously imprisoned in the fortress of Fenestrella for 3 years. In the year 1811, I was transferred from Piedmont to France. It was then that I learned that the god of destiny, who at the time seemed subservient to Napoleon's every wish, had given him a son, and that while still in its cradle, the child had been named King of Rome. Little did I think then that this superman would be overthrown." "But why are you here at all?" "Because in 1807 I meditated the very scheme that Napoleon tried to realize in 1811. Because, like Machiavelli, I desired Italy to be one great, strong, and compact empire, instead of a nest of petty principalities, each with its weak and despotic ruler. Because I thought I had found my Caesar Borgia in a crowned fool, who pretended to share my views so as to better betray me. It was the scheme of Alexander VI and Clement VII. It will never materialize now, for their attempt was fruitless, and not even Napoleon has accomplished it. There is no doubt. Italy is an accursed country." For a moment Dantes stood motionless and mute. "Then you abandon all hope of escaping," he said at last. "I realize that it is impossible, and that it is tantamount to revolting against God to attempt what is contrary to his designs." "Why despair? Why not start afresh?" "Start afresh? You little know how I have toiled. Do you know that it took me 4 years to make my tools? Do you know that for the past 2 years I have been scraping and digging out earth as hard as granite? I have had to move stones that I once thought impossible to loosen. I have spent whole days in these titanic efforts, and there were times when I was overjoyed if by night time I had scraped away a square inch of the cement that age had made as hard as the stones themselves. I have had to pierce the wall of a staircase so that I could deposit all my stones and earth in its well. And I thought I had almost finished my task, and felt I had just enough strength left to accomplish it, when I found that all my plans were frustrated. I assure you, I have known very few successful attempts to escape. Only those have been crowned with success which were planned and worked out with infinite patience. We shall do best now to wait till some unforeseen occurrence gives us the opportunity of making our escape. When such an opportunity occurs, We will seize it. You could well wait, Dantes said with a sigh. Your work occupied every minute of your time, and when you could not work, you had your hope and a brighter future to console you. I accomplished other things besides all this. What did you do? I wrote, or studied. Who gave you paper, pens, and ink? No one, said the Abbé. I made them myself. Dantes looked at the man with admiration, only he could scarcely credit all he told him. Faria noticed this shade of doubt on the young man's face and said, When you come to my cell, I will show you an entire volume entitled Treatise on the Possibility of a General Monarchy in Italy, which is the result of the thoughts, reflections, and researches of my whole life. Ideas which I have worked out in the shadow of the Colosseum at Rome, at the foot of St. Mark's Column at Venice, or on the banks of the Arno at Florence. Do you mean to say you have written it? On 2 shirts. I have invented a preparation by means of which the linen is rendered as smooth and glossy as parchment. I also made some excellent quills which everyone would prefer to the ordinary ones if they were known. I made them from the cartilage of the head of those enormous whiting they sometimes give us on fast days. Formerly, there must have been a fireplace in my cell, which was doubtless closed up some time before I came. It must have been used for very many years, for the interior was coated with soot. I dissolved some soot in a portion of the wine they bring me every Sunday, and my ink was made. For notes to which I wished to draw special attention, I pricked my fingers and wrote with my blood. When can I see all this? Dantes asked. As soon as you like. Let it be at once, then, the young man exclaimed. Then follow me. So saying, the Abbé re-entered the subterranean passage and disappeared. Dantes followed and found himself at the far end of the passage, into which the Abbé's door opened. Here the passage became narrower. Indeed, there was scarcely room for a man to crawl through on his hands and knees. The Abbé's room was paved. It had been by raising one of the flagstones in the darkest corner of the room that he had commenced the laborious task of which Dantes witnessed the completion. As soon as he entered the cell, the young man examined it very carefully, but at first sight it presented nothing out of the ordinary. And now I am very anxious to see your treasures, Dantes said. The Abbé went toward the fireplace, removed a stone which was formerly the hearthstone, and which hid a fairly deep cavity. What do you wish to see first? Show me your work on the monarchy of Italy. Faria took from his cupboard 3 or 4 rolls of linen 4 inches wide and 18 long, which were folded like papyrus leaves. These strips of linen were numbered and covered with writing. Here you have the whole of it, he said. I put the word fini at the bottom of the 78th strip just a week ago. I have used for it 2 of my shirts and all the handkerchiefs I had. If ever I gain my liberty and can find a publisher in Italy who will publish it, my reputation is made. He then showed Dantes the quills he had made, the penknife of which he was particularly proud, and which he had made out of an old iron candlestick, the ink, the matches, the sulphur for which he had obtained by feigning a skin disease, the rope ladder, the material for which he had obtained by unraveling the ends of his sheets, and finally, the needle. On seeing these ingenious products of an intelligent and highly developed brain, Dantes became thoughtful, and it occurred to him that the man might be able to clear up the mystery surrounding his own misfortune, which he himself had been unable to fathom. What are you thinking of? The Abbé asked with a smile, seeing his companion's pensiveness and attributing it to inexpressible admiration. I was thinking that though you have related to me the events of your life, yet you know nothing of mine. Your life, young man, is far too short to contain anything of importance. Nevertheless, it contains a very great misfortune, said Dantes. A misfortune that I do not deserve, and I would rather attribute the authorship of it to mankind and no longer blaspheme God as I have hitherto done. Tell me your story, then. Dantes then related what he called the story of his life, consisting of a voyage to India, 2 or 3 voyages to the East, and finally his last voyage, the death of Captain Leclerc, the package confided to him for the Grand Marshal, the letter given to him by the latter addressed to a certain Monsieur Noirtier. Then he went on to tell his friend of his arrival at Marseille, his interview with his father, his love for Mercedes, his betrothal feast, his arrest, his examination, his temporary imprisonment in the law courts, and finally his permanent imprisonment in the Chateau d'If. After this he knew nothing more, not even how long he had been a prisoner. When Dantes finished his story, the Abbé sat silent, deep in thought. After a time he said, There is a maxim with very deep meaning which says, If you do wish to discover the author of a crime, endeavor to find out in the first place who would derive advantage from the crime committed. You are about to be nominated captain and also to marry a beautiful girl, will you not? That is true. Was it to anyone's interest that you should not be appointed the captain of the Pharaon? And again, was it to anyone's interest that you should not marry Mercedes? Answer the first question first. Order is the key to all problems. I was very popular on board. If the sailors could have chosen their chief, I am sure they would have chosen me. There was only one person who had any reason to wish me ill. I quarreled with him some time ago and challenged him to a duel, but he refused. Now we are coming to the point. What was this man's name? Danglars, the purser of the ship. Had you been appointed captain, would you have retained him as such? Not if it depended on me, for I thought I had noticed some inaccuracies in his accounts. Good. Now, who was present at your last conversation with Captain Leclerc? No one. We were alone. Could anyone have overheard your conversation? Yes, the door was open and... Wait. Yes, it is true. Danglars passed at the very moment Captain Leclerc was handing me the package for the Grand Marshal. Better still. Now we are on the right track. Did you take anyone ashore when you put in at the Isle of Elba? No one at all. What did you do with the letter the Grand Marshal gave you? I put it in my portfolio. Had you your portfolio with you then? How could a portfolio large enough to contain an official letter find room in a sailor's pocket? My portfolio was on board. So you did not put the letter into the portfolio until you returned to the ship? No. What did you do with the letter from the time you left Port Farajo till you reached the ship? I carried it in my hand. So that when you went on board, everyone could see that you carried a letter? Yes. Danglars as well? Yes, Danglars as well as the others. Now listen to me and try to recall all the incidents. Do you remember how the denunciation was phrased? Oh yes, I read it over 3 times and each word is engraved on my memory. And he repeated it, word for word. The abbé shrugged his shoulders. It is clear as daylight, he said. You must have a very noble heart and simple mind that you had not your suspicions from the very outset. Do you really think so? Dantes exclaimed. Such infamy is not possible. How did Danglars usually write? He had a good round hand. How was the anonymous letter written? With a backward slant. The abbé smiled. I suppose it was a disguised hand? It was too bold to be disguised. The abbé took one of the quills and wrote the first 2 or 3 lines of the denunciation on a piece of prepared linen. Dantes stood aghast and looked at the abbé in terror, and exclaimed, How extraordinarily alike the 2 writings are! The simple explanation is that the denunciation was written with the left hand. I have noticed that whereas handwritings with the right hand vary, those written with the left hand are nearly always alike. Now let us pass to the second question. Was it to anyone's interest that you should not marry Mercedes? Yes, there was a young man who loved her, a young Catalan named Fernand. Do you think he would be capable of writing the letter? No, he would rather have stuck his knife into me. Besides, he was ignorant of the details stated in the denunciation. I had not mentioned them to anyone. Stay a moment. Did Danglars know Fernand? No. Oh, yes, I remember now. On the eve of my betrothal, I saw them together in Eau Pamphil's tavern. Danglars was friendly and jocular, but Fernand looked pale and agitated. A tailor named Cadros, whom I know very well, was with them. He was quite drunk, though. Do you want to know something else? Asked the abbé, laughing. Yes, since you seem to be able to fathom every mystery. Tell me why I was only submitted to 1 examination and why I was condemned without trial. This is a more serious matter, was the reply. What we have just done for your 2 friends is mere child's play by comparison. You must give me the most precise details. Who examined you? The deputy. Did you tell him everything? Yes, everything. Did his manner towards you change at all in the course of the examination? He certainly did appear disturbed when he read the compromising letter. He seemed quite upset at my misfortune. Are you quite sure he was so perturbed on your account? At any rate, he gave me one great proof of his sympathy. He burnt the letter, my one incriminating document, before my very eyes. Ah, this man may have been a greater scoundrel than you imagine. The deputy's conduct was too sublime to be natural. To whom was the letter addressed? To Monsieur Nautier, 13 Rue Coq-Heron, Paris. Can you think of any selfish motive the deputy might have had in destroying the letter? I do not know of any, but he may have had some reason, for he made me promise 2 or 3 times that in my own interest I would not speak to anyone of the letter, and he made me answer that I would not utter the name of the person to whom it was addressed. Notier. The abbé repeated. Notier. I knew a notier at the court of the old Queen of Etruria, a man who was a gridironist during the Revolution. What was the deputy's name? De Villefort. The abbé burst into loud laughter. Dantes looked at him in stupefaction. What is the matter? He said. Only that I have a clear and complete understanding of everything now. Poor blind young man. This notier was none other than the deputy's father. His father? Dantes cried out. Yes, his father, who styles himself Notier de Villefort, the abbé replied. Dantes now began to see quite clearly, and many details which had been incomprehensible to him up to this moment now began to assume their real significance. Villefort's change of demeanor during the examination, the burning of the letter, the exacted oath, the magistrate's almost supplicating voice, which seemed to implore rather than to threaten, all passed through his mind. A cry broke from his lips, and he staggered like a drunken man. Then, rushing toward the opening which led to his cell, he called out, I must be alone to think this over. Reaching his cell, he fell on his bed, and here the turnkey found him in the evening, motionless, his eyes staring into space, his features drawn. During these hours of meditation, which had passed like so many seconds, he had formed a terrible resolution and taken a fearful oath. At length, a voice roused him from his reverie. It was the voice of Faria, who had come to invite Dantes to have his supper with him. The young man followed him. His face had lost that drawn look it had worn, and instead there was a determined, almost radiant expression which clearly denoted that he had taken a resolution. The abbé looked at him attentively. I almost regret having helped you in your researches and having told you what I did, he said. Why? Because I have instilled into your heart a feeling that previously held no space there. Vengeance. Dantes smiled and said, Let us speak of something else. The abbé looked at him again and shook his head sadly, but did what his companion asked and spoke of other matters. Dantes listened to his words with admiring attention. At first he spoke of things and ideas of which the young man had no comprehension until later on, like the aurora borealis, which lights the navigator of the northern seas on his way. He showed the young man new landscapes and horizons illuminated by fantastic lights. And Dantes realized what happiness it would bring him to an intelligent being to follow this exalted mind to those moral, philosophical, or social heights to which he was wont to soar. You must impart to me a little of your knowledge, Dantes said. Otherwise an ignoramus like myself will only be a bore to you. I am sure that you must prefer solitude to a companion without education, such as I am. If you do what I ask, I promise to speak no more of escaping. Alas, my good friend, said the abbé, smiling, human knowledge is very limited, and when I have taught you mathematics, physics, history, and the 3 or 4 living languages I speak, you will know all that I know. It will not take more than 2 years to give you the knowledge I possess. 2 years, exclaimed Dantes. Do you really think you can teach me all these things in 2 years? What will you teach first? I am anxious to begin. I am thirsting for knowledge. That self-same evening, the 2 prisoners drew up a plan for the younger man's education and began to put it into execution the next day. Dantes had a prodigious memory and a great facility for assimilation. The mathematical turn of his mind gave him aptitude for all kinds of calculation, while the sense of poetry that is in every sailor gave life to dryness of figures and severity of lines. Whether it was that the distraction afforded him by his study had taken the place of liberty, or because he had adhered strictly to the promise given to the abbé, he made no further reference to escaping, and the days passed rapidly, each day adding to his store of knowledge. At the end of the year, he was a different man. Dantes noticed, however, that in spite of his companionship, the Abbé Faria seemed to lose some of his animation with each succeeding day. It seemed as though there was something on his mind. At times he would become wrapped in thought, sigh unconsciously, and then suddenly rise and with his arms crossed over his breast, gloomily pace his cell. One day, all at once, he ceased his incessant wandering and exclaimed, "If only there were no sentry!" "Have you found a means of escape, then?" asked Dantes excitingly. "Yes, provided that the sentry in the galley is both deaf and blind." "He shall be deaf, and he shall be blind," answered the young man in such a determined way that it frightened the abbé. "No, no," he cried out, "I will have no bloodshed." Dantes wanted to pursue the subject, but the Abbé shook his head and refused to answer any more questions. 3 months passed. "Are you strong?" the Abbé one day asked Dantes. Without replying, Dantes picked up the chisel, bent it in the shape of a horseshoe, and straightened it out again. "Will you promise not to kill the sentry except as a last resort?" "Yes, on my honor." "Then we may accomplish our task," was the reply. "How long will it be before we accomplish it?" "At least a year." "Shall we begin at once, without delay?" "Here is my plan." The Abbé showed Dantes a drawing he had made. It was a plan of his own cell, that of Dantes, and the passage joining them. In the middle of this passage, they would bore a tunnel like those used in mines. This tunnel would lead the prisoners under the gallery where the sentry was on duty. Arrived there, a large excavation would be made by loosening one of the flagstones with which the floor of the gallery was paved. At a given moment, the stone would give way under the soldier's weight, and he would disappear in the excavation below. Dantes would throw himself upon him before he had recovered from the shock of the fall, and while he was still unable to defend himself. He would gag and blindfold him, and then the 2 prisoners would jump through one of the windows, climb down the outside wall by means of the rope ladder the Abbé had made, and they would be saved. Dantes clapped his hands and his eyes shone with joy. It was such a simple plan that it was bound to succeed. That same day, the 2 miners commenced operations with renewed vigor after their long rest. At the end of 15 months, the hole was made. The excavation was completed under the gallery, and the 2 prisoners could distinctly hear the measured tread of the sentry. They were obliged to wait for a dark, moonless night for the success of their plans, and their one fear was that the flagstone might give way under the soldiers' heavy tread sooner than they desired. To guard against this, they decided to prop the stone up with a kind of beam they had found in the foundations. Dantes was busy putting it into position when he suddenly heard the Abbé cry out in pain. He rushed to him and found him standing in the middle of the room, his face ghastly pale, his hands clenched, and the perspiration streaming down his forehead. "Good heavens!" cried Dantes. "Whatever has happened? What ails you?" Quick, the Abbé replied. "Listen to me." Dantes looked at Ferrier's livid face. His eyes had deep lines under them, his lips were white, and his very hair seemed to stand on end. "Oh, what is the matter with you?" Dantes cried, terror-stricken. "All is over with me. A terrible disease, it may even be mortal, is about to attack me. I feel it coming. I was seized with it the year before my imprisonment. There is only one remedy for it. Run quickly to my cell and raise the foot of my bed. It is hollow, and you will find in it a little glass of bottle half filled with a red liquid. Bring it to me. No, I might be found here. Help me back to my cell while I still have the strength. Who knows what may happen while the attack lasts?" In a flash, Dantes realized that his hopes of escape were now dashed to the ground. Nevertheless, he did not lose his head. He crept into the tunnel, dragging his luckless companion after him, and with infinite trouble helped him into his cell and placed him on the bed. "Thank you," the Abbé said, trembling in every limb as though he had just stepped out of freezing water. "I am seized with a cataleptic fit. It may be that I shall not move or make a sound. On the other hand, I may stiffen, foam at the mouth, and shriek. Try not to let them hear me, for if they do, they might change my cell, and we should be separated forever. When you see me motionless, cold, and to all appearances dead, then, and not until then, force my teeth apart with the knife, and pour 8 to 10 drops of the liquid down my throat, and I shall perhaps revive." "Perhaps," exclaimed Dantes, grief-stricken. "Help! Help!" the Abbé cried. I am dead!" The attack was so sudden and so violent that the unfortunate prisoner was unable to finish the word. His features became distorted, his eyes dilated, his mouth twisted, his cheeks took on a purple hue. He struggled, foamed at the mouth, groaned, and groaned. This lasted for 2 hours. Then, stretching himself out in a last convulsion, he became livid and lay as inert as a block of wood, whiter and colder than marble, more crushed than the reed of a trampled underfoot. Edmond waited until life seemed to have departed from the Abbé's body, and he apparently lay cold in death. Then, taking the knife, with great difficulty, he forced the blade between the clenched teeth. He carefully poured 10 drops of the red liquid down his friend's throat, and waited. An hour elapsed, and still the Abbé made not the slightest movement. Dantes began to fear that he had waited too long before administering the remedy, and stood anxiously gazing at him. At last a faint color spread over his cheeks. His eyes, which had remained open in a fixed stare, now began to see. A slight sigh escaped his lips, and he began to move. "He is saved! He is saved!" Dantes exclaimed. The abbé could not yet speak, but he pointed with visible anxiety toward the door. Dantes listened and heard the gaoler's footsteps. He jumped up, darted toward the opening, which he entered, replacing the flagstone after him, and regained his cell. An instant later the gaoler entered, and, as usual, found his prisoner sitting on his bed. Scarcely had he turned his back, scarcely had the sound of his footsteps in the passage outside died away, when Dantes, too anxious to eat anything, hastened back to the abbé's cell by the same way he had come a few seconds before. Faria had regained consciousness, but he was still lying stretched on his bed, helpless and inert. "I little thought I should see you again," he said. "Why?" asked the young man. "Did you think you were going to die?" "No, but everything is ready for your flight, and I thought you would go." "Without you!" he exclaimed. "Did you really think I was capable of such a base action?" "I see now that I was mistaken, but alas, I feel very weak and worn." "Take courage. Your strength will return," said Dantes, seating himself on the bed and taking the abbé's hands. Faria shook his head. "My first fit lasted but half an hour, leaving only a feeling of hunger. I could even get up alone. Today I can move neither my right leg nor my arm. My head feels heavy, which proves a rush of blood to the brain. The third attack will leave me entirely paralyzed, or else it will kill me." No, I assure you, you will not die. When you have your third attack, if you have one, you will be at liberty." "My friend," the old man said, "you are mistaken. The attack I have just had has condemned me to perpetual imprisonment. Before fleeing, one must be able to walk." "Well, then we will wait a week, a month, 2 months if necessary. During that time you will regain your strength. All is ready for our escape. We have but to choose the day and hour. The day you feel strong enough to swim, we will put our plan into execution." "I shall swim no more," Faria said. "My arm is paralyzed, not for 1 day only, but forever. Raise it yourself, and you will soon know by the weight of it." The young man did as he was bid, and the arm fell back heavy and lifeless. "You are convinced now, I expect," Faria said. "Believe me, I know what I am saying. I have thought about it unceasingly ever since I had the first attack. I have been expecting this, for it runs in the family. My father, as well as my grandfather, died after the third attack. The physician who prepared this medicine for me has predicted the same fate for me." "The physician has made a mistake," Dantes cried out. "As for your paralysis, you will not trouble me in the least. I shall swim the sea with you on my shoulders." "My son," the abbé said, "you are a sailor and a swimmer, and should therefore know that a man could not possibly make more than 50 strokes with such a load on his back. I shall stay here till the hour of my deliverance has struck, the hour of my death. But you, my son, flee! Escape! You are young, lithe, strong. Trouble not about me. I give you back your word." "Very well," said Dantes. "In that case, I shall stay here too." Rising and solemnly stretching one hand over the other, the old man said, "By all that I deem most holy, I swear that I shall not leave you till death takes one of us." Faria looked up at his noble-minded, simple young man, and read in the expression on his face how animated by a feeling of pure devotion, the sincerity of his affection, and the loyalty of his oath. "So be it," said the sick man. "I accept." "Thank you." Then holding out to him his hand, he said, "It may be that you will be rewarded for this unselfish devotion, but as I cannot leave, and you will not, we must fill in the tunnel under the gallery. The soldier might notice that that particular spot is hollow and call the inspector's attention to it. We should then be found out and separated. Go and do it at once. Unfortunately, I cannot help you. Spend the whole night on the task if necessary, and come to me again in the morning after the gaoler has made his visit. I shall have something important to tell you." Dantes took the abbé's hand and was rewarded with a smile. With a feeling of deep respect, the young man then left his old friend in obedience to his wishes. And that was chapter 13. Quite interesting prisoners, wouldn't you say? I'll see you all next time.